Sounds great.
All right, so welcome to our next episode, our current episode of the Leaders Retreat. We had planned on featuring a conversation between Simon Holzapfel and Todd Covert, the board chair and head of schools for the Berkshire Montessori School, also the founders of Crowbox Partners and Beartown Mountain Leadership. And unfortunately, Todd had something that came up. But Simon is going to walk us through a presentation that they have been giving that really goes ahead and lays out, what does strategy flow look like in action when it's actually being implemented in a school as the new way of delivering on strategic initiatives, on ensuring that the teams within the school, the administration, staff are all aligned and easy, with a clear direction on what it is to execute and what kind of needs to be executed next. And so with that said, I'm going to turn things over to Simon, who is going to give us a little presentation. And are you going to be demonstrating any of the boards?
We'll not be demonstrating the boards. We'll have a couple of screenshots of the boards.
Okay. All right. And maybe if Todd can make it in the next episode or in next month's Leaders Retreat, we'd be able to do something like that and have it more of an open forum along those lines. All right. Yeah. With that said, I'm going to go on mute and I'll hand it over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great fun to be here again. What I want to do is just very briefly talk about some of the context for this deck. I spent 6 years as a head of school of a boarding school in the Hudson Valley. And while I was there, I met Todd. His daughter went to the school that I was heading. And he and I struck up a friendship, and that continues as both a friendship and a working partnership now at the Montessori School of the Berkshires. And what you're going to see in this deck is many years of study and refinement and practice that responded to especially smaller schools with smaller budgets needing to be able to develop and design and deliver strategy without the tens of thousands of dollars and years of time that often attends the kind of standard process of strategic planning in particular. So I've always been kind of a strategy nerd. I think strategy is really important. Too often people think it's only for experts. It's really not. And so what we're going to do is talk a bit about how that works, both in our school and when Todd and I are working with school leaders, sort of what does it look like and what's the foundation for jumping into the strategy flow patterns in a school. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. All right. So Jeff, is that coming through? Is that share working?
That is perfect.
Okay, great. And so Todd and I have presented this on several different groups, a couple of different conferences. And this is really about adaptive partnership and getting the head of school and the board in particular working together. Really what we're trying to do is talk about the design and delivery of strategy as a team starts from strategic thinking to strategic doing. And so what we're trying to show you is what often feels like, to a head at least, the three-ring circus of their job. And so the head is at this interesting pivot point between the design and development of strategy and then the development and the delivery of strategy by the teams that the head of school works with. If you notice that on the left-hand side, you see the word strategy, on the right-hand side, you see tactics. When you think about some of the best practices in governance, we know that the Board of Trustees works with the head on the strategy side. However, the board's involvement needs to stop for the sanity of all involved at the tactical layer, because that really is the head of school's purview with the teams. And so that right-hand side, lighter blue circle is that fact. And it's also true that for the alignment that Jeff spoke about earlier to exist, for that trust within the group to work, there needs to be feedback cycles, and feedback cycles that are not just quarterly, but in shorter cycles, because again, oftentimes schools don't have time to spend 4 months between doing and thinking. And so those feedback loops at the bottom, you'll see a little bit of a version of later on. And so what makes it easier for a board of trustees to really honor that line between the strategic thinking and doing, between strategy and tactics, is that very healthy and well-developed and patterned feedback loop. One of the most important things, especially in schools where people tend to be busy, is actually making decisions. So when you think about a board and a head steering a ship, you can break that down into, at some level, just a long series of decisions. The more appropriate the decisions to the context and the goals, the better they will do. No decisions equals no progress. This was something I myself, learned firsthand, and also witnessed a lot of examples of when I sat on the New York State Association of Independent Schools Commission on Accreditation. And so there were, across those 4 years, many instances of very functional organizations where the rate of decision making was appropriate to what needed to go on, what the context of the school and that sort of thing. It was also true that in the schools that were under more stress, were having more difficulty, often there was a mismatch where the decision-making rate, the kind of metabolism of the strategic challenges into workable solutions, was not matching either the school's current need or the changes in the environment, or sometimes both. When Todd and I work with leaders, what we want to often do is sort of break down that decision-making process into something that is as systematic as possible. And we use particular language to capture some of the differences between the different kinds of decisions. And so I'll just briefly talk about these domains. The two domains on top, clear and complicated, those represent what's called an ordered decision space. And in an ordered decision space, the fundamental characteristic is predictability. When things are clear, when things are complicated, you have a relatively clear line between cause and effect. And that is in distinction to the complex and chaotic domains where you don't have that. Those are disordered or unordered spaces where there are insufficient constraints involved. And so it feels, not so good. Let me just say a couple of words so that you have some mental models to connect with these different domains. The clear domain is as simple as, which side of the road do you drive on? If I'm pulling out of my driveway and I'm turning to the right, I could pull into the near lane or the far lane. If I'm in the UK, I'm going to safely turn into the far lane. If I'm in the US, I would come into the near lane if I'm turning right out of my driveway. So that's clear. In those instances, all you're really trying to do is categorize the situation and then respond. Clear decisions do not require a lot of mental effort because you're simply categorizing and responding. It's sort of like in something like checkers, say, very straightforward. Or the card game war, where you're really just kind of running an algorithm. To move to the complicated space, it is a bit less ordered, but you still have that predictability. In the complex space, the assumption is that you can get enough information about whatever you're trying to do, whatever goal you have, to make a decision. This is akin to something like chess. And the reason that these are ordered spaces is in both checkers and chess, the entire information about the game is equally visible to both participants. And so there's no missing information. It's very clear in that way. Obviously, you don't know what is in your opponent's mind, but when it comes to the actual playing of the game space, you've got everything you need to understand what is the true condition of the game or the decision. And we'll distinguish that between the other two domains, the complex and the chaotic domain. I'm going to talk about the chaotic domain first because it's the one that hopefully people can stay out of. And this is a domain where you're just in chaos. There are no constraints. You're in a kind of groundless state. And so the recommendation in moments of chaos is simply to act and then observe to get some information about what it is that is going on. If you're a senior leader in a school or an organization and somebody quits a key person quits at the last minute, that throws you into chaos. And you quickly need to decide, okay, how are we going to act to then bring some clarity to this situation? The complex domain is the domain that really is most interesting. And if you have studied anything about decision science and specifically complex adaptive systems, the complex domain is the domain where complex adaptive systems are in charge. And for the most part, a lot of what goes on in any organization, the school or business, is there. If you notice in the middle of the chart, there's the confused domain. And when we're working with leaders, the goal is to acknowledge when you're in confused. Confused is okay. However, you can't stay there forever. And so because this is about action and decisions, we'll work with leaders to assess the situation starting from confused and then decide the action pattern. In complexity, what you're looking for are what are called enabling constraints. So these are decisions about whatever the challenge is that brings more order to it. And when we work with leaders, we're trying to work from the complex domain and kind of run the stairs, if you will, up into the complicated domain. In the complex domain, think of this more like poker, or even better, imagine playing poker where you knew that there were 5 random cards inserted into the deck. Causality here is less clear, and what it requires of leaders is to act, to design experiments about their situation, run those experiments as quickly as they can to learn and kind of push that knowledge up the stairs so that they're then ready to make clearer decisions. Now, given that we need to make decisions, and we're making decisions often with a board and a head, it's important to understand that boards vary, the dynamics vary. There's all sorts of different patterns and proclivities of boards, and I'm going to just talk about some of them that we see. There are some boards where if you're involved and you're a head, it feels like this. There's just literally no alignment. The people are pulling in opposite directions. It tends to be very contestorial. Often in a case like this, that's just kind of whoever is loudest wins. Hopefully no one on this call has been on the receiving end of this from any way as a board member or a head, but you know it if you felt it, and it's really uncomfortable. And really the school often suffers when this is what's going on. It is also the case that sometimes that you have a board that's just not very engaged. When we did this for a different organization earlier in the summer, we heard some anecdotal evidence about a lot of boards really struggling to engage, often because the board members didn't know how, or there weren't clear structures for them to participate in a way that was appropriate to their capacity, skills, etc. And so, again, this is really difficult as a head of school because you're just trying to get people engaged before you can even get any work done. And so the anti-engaged pattern is one that this method that we're going to show helps with. This picture is aiming to show people who are either not that serious about what they're doing or have information that they're not sharing with other people. Some boards will sort of hoard information. They'll be very vertically siloed, where there's not a lot of coordination among the members because they're all holding their own information for some reason. This makes it very difficult as a head because you're just kind of playing a guessing game and you're not really sure who's there for what. Sometimes as a head or as a board member, what you feel like you're doing mostly is herding cats. You just simply don't have the alignment necessary to bring focus to the endeavor. And so you feel like you're kind of just running around trying to get things ordered. Finally, what we would hope for all people involved in schools is that you get something ultimately more like this. People are facing each other. They're enjoying what they're doing. The work is clear. You have a diverse set of perspectives, opinions, backgrounds on the good work of steering that school and working with the head to develop the strategy to see that the school's mission and ability to deliver the mission gets stronger over time. In the world of organizational dynamics, boards are trying to institute what are called 2 noble patterns, the patterns without which an organization is really never going to go anywhere. The first of those patterns is unity of purpose. And so if you think about what you've just seen above, when you have unity of purpose, you've managed pretty well many of those anti-patterns that sometimes boards can get into. This is where everyone is really focused on that goal and they're willing to do whatever it takes to connect the organization to the resources, to the decision making, et cetera, that's required. Along with unity of purpose, is community of trust. This is the glue amongst the people in their relationships that let them build durable structures of sensing and doing. So we're always trying to build these two noble patterns in with the team. And really the foundation of that, the thing that gets the organization to function in a safer way, in a way that sees them more fit for purpose for their environment, is in partnership. And so really we're talking here about a strategic partnership. Excuse me. Just working through a cold here. The best practices are a few, and we want to just talk about those. One of the primary best practices that a board or a head will want to do to tame the chaos of whatever is going on and get them into that more ordered way of deciding things is to what's called make the work visible. And when we say make the work visible, people often scratch their head and they're like, wow, that's really strange. I don't know what that means. What we're showing you here is three different sorts of what are called information radiators that are artifacts of visible work. On the bottom left, you see just a very simple workflow board where you talk about what's in to do, what do you focus on, and what's done. The middle picture is an artifact of a much more complicated system, information radiator. And at the top right, you see what Todd and I will actually use for our school, which is nothing more than a digital version of those other two information radiators. The information radiator lets all stakeholders see exactly the condition, the projects, the progress of everything that the board is working on with the head. One of the things that a good information radiator allows is for meetings to be really different. Often in board meetings, you can have this endless stream of committee reports. Often you can get, very little strategic work done because there's just so much reporting of information. The information radiator lets you have shorter meetings, much more frequent sync up so you can have quicker learning cycles, and most importantly, fewer or almost no update meetings. When you have an information radiator and you maintain it, all of the updates are contained right there in real time in your workflow or strategy flow board. Similarly, what those same structures allow is a particular sort of discipline to manage the cognitive load of both board members and the head. Cognitive load is understood better and better now with neuroscience. And what we see is when people are overloaded, they slow down or they shut down. And what we want to do in using the information radiator is to do what's called less work in progress, or WIP. The idea here is when you get more focused, you actually have more time getting things done and less time multitasking. When you look at how much time any individual can actually get work done, when you have unitary focus, 100% of your time is focused on that learning or decision making. By the time you get down to the bottom there at 5, you can see 80% of your time is just in multitasking. And so for a board or for a head, really getting yourself focused through the information radiator is what lets you be more effective, get to those decision points faster so that you can make more progress in the development and design of that strategy for the teams to then go ahead and deliver in a cleaner way. What we're going to do here is just show a little bit next time about what does this look like. And I want to remind people here, when we're talking about adaptive leadership, the feedback is visible and arrives through those work boards that we just showed. And so the work board functioning, the visible information radiator, lets that feedback really happen quickly, so that between design and deliver, you're talking about months to weeks, not years and years. And most schools, frankly, don't have the time to, in adapting to their environment, in strengthening their fitness for purpose in their market. They really need that to have the school develop in the way that it needs to. Pardon me. So what we want to do here, now that we've shown you some tools and some best practices, is get to 3 very practical steps to faster alignment of the stakeholders involved and the ultimate goal of reduced stress, which then allows for better decision making, that sort of thing, more flow of progress. The 3 steps are summarized as such. The first one is to start the flow, the purpose. And if we go back to those 2 noble patterns, unity of purpose and community of trust, the job in delivering strategy is for the board and the head to really get clear about the purpose of any particular initiative or strategy that they're considering. The structure that Todd and I use makes that really easy, because when you put one of those cards up on the workboard, the purpose is really in every card. And so as that card moves across and comes to a team, no team ever starts to work on something without knowing what is the purpose of this? What is it tied to in our bigger picture? The second thing we want to do is map the flow of value, and that's where the information radiator comes in to enable that and leverage the power of just visual learning. That is what most humans have as their preferential mode of learning and thinking, to kind of rationalize and make that very clear and predictable. And then finally, through the information radiator, you're visualizing that flow of work. So begin with purpose. We know that in schools are knowledge work organizations. And so those people who work in schools are knowledge workers. Years of research by Daniel Pink and others shows that if you want to bring the best out of people, you've got to begin with purpose. Simon Sinek will talk about start with why. This is a variant of that same impulse and that same recommendation. When we're developing a strategy, we have 3 essential questions. Who are we serving? In other words, who will be the beneficiary of the strategy that we're considering? Who will be getting that value? What are the issues? What are the needs that particular stakeholder group currently has? And what are they not getting now, so that we know we're really targeting our efforts, our thinking, our resources to those particular needs. And then, of course, why? Why does it matter to them? Why is this important to them? Too often, the assumptions that a board will make is, oh, if we just build something, then that will solve our problem. Not necessarily knowing that there are needs that don't necessarily all require one particular solution. Oftentimes schools have real facility needs, so I'm not knocking that as a real need. However, it's often not the case that a school really knows, if we can just build this new blah, 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 that will suddenly magnetize people to our school. That's often not the case. And schools often get themselves into trouble by just thinking and not really testing and validating the purpose assumptions behind any given strategy. Second thing here that we've already talked about is visualizing. And this really allows us to understand how value is being delivered. In this system that we use, there are 2 kinds of quote unquote customers or end users. Because we have beneficiaries to a strategy that are internal to the school, staff, employees, etc., those are different than the external customers, the children or the families who are benefiting from the operation of the school. And what that allows us to do is differentiate 2 different flows of value. The internal customers, the people who work within the school, what we really focus on with them is making visible their process flows. So what you're seeing here on the screen is an example of a process flow for admissions. If you're a school and you're, operating, you've got lots of different processes that, if you stack them all up, would be the totality of the processes of your school system. You can break those down and examine them. And by doing that, you can see places where value might be locked up, or value could be greatly increased if you could make some or such other strategy change to unblock that bottleneck. That is different than what's called the value stream. And the value stream is, what is it that students and their parents are getting from those operations? And so we delineate those 2 things when we're working with schools and boards. because when we can distinguish between those two categories, we can build different information radiators to create strategy and deliver strategy. This is an example of that latter type, not a value flow. Oh no, I'm sorry, this is a value flow. This is just a more detailed version of what the admissions process can look like. And then what we want to do is talk a bit about how the work flows. This was the second point of the 3 steps to alignment. What we want to do is get heads and boards really understanding how the flows of knowledge information work across the entire organization, so that at the center of this schematic is where the board and the head work. That strategy flows out to the leadership team and then out to those end users. And then there's a feedback system that kind of comes back to the center and lets the information about how is the strategy working, how are our tactics working. And so the tactical value then flows sort of out and back up in a pulse sort of manner, if you could actually visualize it, in real time. One of the things that's important to understand is that there are different, what are called time boxes or sort of time series for different types of work. We want to understand that strategy flows much more slowly than tactics. Strategy, these are things that will take 6 to 36 months for many of these things. It's also important to understand that the head and the board are really doing the strategy. The tactical execution, by contrast, moves more quickly, is driven by action within teams. And those are things that small moves can be made in just a matter of 1 or 2 weeks. In between those two, the articulation point is the macro cycle. And that's where, when we're working with boards, you want to design a large piece in the mesocycle, break it down into macro cycle size pieces of work, and then let the teams get to work on the tactical delivery and testing of that. So that's the structure that we work in, to let people have some sort of structure to the learning. We do this again in the workflow board to visualize it. And we do this really to reduce stress. When all of the work is visible that teams and leaders are doing, you don't have to spend time answering the question like, where are we now? What are we doing? It also allows alignment to reign happily, so that the unity of purpose is always present. Sometimes there are misunderstandings. Sometimes people fall out of alignment, which is fine. We then rely on and leverage the visible information to maintain and rebuild that alignment. And all this rides across the top of a steady flow of information and communication about the current condition of any piece of strategy, any tactical thing. This is a screenshot of Todd's school. At the end of the year, you see there's lots of stuff over on the right that has been done. There are some things still in the backlog to be done. And if you notice, in the summertime, there's not a whole lot going on in the middle. This represents a moment in time when a lot of the admin team was on vacation. We were kind of between board meetings, and so there was not a lot of WIP or work in progress here. And what we're going to do is stop here. And in part 2 of this, we're going to do an actual exercise with folks so they can actually see how does this work in real life. And we'll model that by taking a strategic initiative, doing the who, what, why, breaking it down from a mesocycle into a macro cycle, and then going further and getting it ready to the point that it's been really thoroughly metabolized as strategy to do some tactical handoffs to a team. And that is the sum total of today's presentation. I'm going to stop my screen share and come back to the regular thing here.
All right, outstanding. That was awesome. We would open it up for questions. I don't know, Don, if you have any questions. You're on mute, Don. So if you do have any questions, it would be hard to hear them right now.
Yeah, a great presentation, Simon, and so excited about this development. Can I ask just first, where are you in terms of presenting this to NAIS? Has it already been presented, or are you about to?
Yeah, so we're scheduled to do this next week down in DC with the Leadership Through Partnership cohort.
Wow.
So I'm very excited for that. I want to, the other thing I should say is just in thanks to NAIS, I wouldn't have gotten on this road were it not for the leadership of NAIS inviting me into their strategy lab group, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And so I really always thank them for getting me on this learning track. Don, I think you might have seen a version of this earlier in the year at the Nativity Miguel Coalition. And maybe after we stop the recording, I'd love to get some feedback from you on, did you notice any differences, any improvements, any degradations of it? We can do that. We can do that
All
offline.
right, that sounds good. So just to be clear, the audience in the upcoming NAS meeting is board chairs and heads of schools. That's the leadership through partnership cohort.
Yep, exactly. So it'll be a bunch of, I don't, 3 dozen heads and their chairs.
Yep. All right. That sounds great. And did I hear correctly in an earlier Zoom that you will be presenting this to there was a possibility that you might engage the NAS staff itself in this kind of conversation. Is that still in the works or?
It is, yeah. So they have floated that, and we're very much open to that. Certainly, for me, the mission is to make lives easier for people within education. Todd and I have developed this at first selfishly for ourselves because we needed to end the chaos, and then also realize, hey, why don't we just show other people what we're developing, because the science behind it is really pretty well settled at this point. It's the implementation of it for school context in particular that had been missing, and that we're really trying to bring to NIS. And so, the NIS folks themselves have expressed interest in adopting some of this and perhaps using it at their own internal
and when you say they've expressed, is that a Deborah Wilson voice or was that a Tim Fish voice? I know he's off on his own at this point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.